The Silent Path. In a small town nestled between mountains and forests, there lived a monk named Jorin. His cabin was simple, wooden, with windows that let in only what was necessary: light, air, and silence. The people from the surrounding area knew him as a man who did not live by the hurried pace of the modern world. In an age when everyone longed for speed, connection, and constant information, Jorin remained in his valley, far from technology, news, and distractions. He considered peace a rare gift, something people could find, if only they looked inward. One day a young man named Kaen arrived in the valley. His face carried the weight of the world, the restlessness brought on by every busy day, every notification, every ping, and the endless rush of thoughts. He had traveled far, searching for answers. He had read books, visited temples, meditated through long nights. Yet his mind remained unsettled. When he heard of the monk who had attained silence without words, he set out to find him. "Mistress," Kaen said, bowing before Jorin, "I come seeking teachings." Jorin motioned for him to sit but did not speak. Instead, he slowly prepared tea. The young man watched him closely, waiting for some sign, some words of wisdom. But Jorin simply poured the tea into a cup and handed it to Kaen. Then, without a word, he left for the garden. Kaen was confused. He had been expecting answers, guidance, something extraordinary. Instead, he found himself sitting in silence. He spent the night in the cabin, and by morning, Jorin was already awake, collecting fallen leaves. The day passed in quiet work, gathering wood, tending the garden, the occasional pause to drink tea. And yet, as the day wore on, Kane's mind raced. He wanted to understand, to know why Jorin didn't speak, why he didn't give him what he was looking for. The next evening, Kaen finally asked, "Master, when will the teachings begin?" Jorin smiled faintly and said, "What do you think is happening here?" Kaen was bewildered. What did he mean by that? What was the master trying to teach him? Still, he stayed. The days turned into weeks. The autumn passed quietly, the leaves turning gold and falling gently. As the days slipped by, Kaen began to notice things he had overlooked before. The crispness of the air, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the quiet rhythm of life. But still, deep within him, a restlessness lingered. One day, as they were sweeping the fallen leaves from the path, Kaen stopped and said softly, "Master, I don't know what I'm looking for anymore." Jorin paused, then gently laid down his broom. He stood for a moment, looking at the trees, and then spoke. "What are you searching for, Kaen?" The young man hesitated. "I think I'm searching for peace, for something that will quiet my mind, something that will bring clarity." Jorin nodded slowly. "The peace you seek is already within you. You need not look for it outside." Kaen frowned, unsure of what Jorin meant. "But how do I find it? In this world?" He gestured toward the village in the distance. "It's so fast. There's no time to breathe, to think. How can I find peace in all this noise?" Jorin smiled, a knowing smile. "The world will always be noisy, Kaen. But within the noise, there is silence waiting to be heard. It is not a silence that is absent, but a silence that is always present, hidden in plain sight." Kaen didn't fully understand, but he felt a shift in the air. Maybe it wasn't about finding something external. Maybe it was about recognizing what was already there. The next day, Jorin set Kaen to work on small, simple tasks: cleaning, sweeping, gathering firewood. With each task, Kaen noticed the rhythm of his movements, the quiet of his breath, the simplicity of the actions. Slowly his mind began to quiet. The restlessness that had once felt so heavy started to fade. But even as his mind settled, Kaen still felt uncertain. "Master," he asked one evening, as they sat together by the fire, "when will I know? When will I be enlightened?" Jorin glanced at him, then simply replied, "When you stop looking for it, it will find you." Kaen was puzzled. "What do you mean? How can I stop looking for something I don't even understand?" Jorin didn't answer right away. He simply leaned back and looked at the fire. The flames danced, crackling in the quiet. After a long pause, he said, "Enlightenment is not something you possess. It is not something to be found or achieved. It is simply being present with what is. In the fire, in the wind, in the tea, in the work. You are already part of it." Kaen sat in silence, trying to digest the words. The idea seemed elusive. How could he be part of something without grasping it? But as he sat there listening to the crackling fire, he began to understand. Enlightenment wasn't a destination, but a way of being. It was not something separate from his life. It was woven into every moment, every task, every breath. As the weeks passed, the quiet rhythm of the valley became familiar to Kaen. His initial restlessness began to fade, though a subtle tension still lingered within him. He had followed Jorin's teachings, or rather, his absence of teachings. It had become clear that it was not in grand gestures or profound words that enlightenment was found, but in the silent moments between breaths, in the simplicity of daily actions. One evening, as Kaen was sweeping the path near the cabin, Jorin approached him. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. He stood silently beside Kaen for a moment, then spoke. "Have you found what you were searching for?" Kaen paused, the broom in his hands, and thought carefully before answering. "I'm not sure," he said slowly. "I feel different. There's less noise in my mind, but I don't know if I've found what you mean by peace." Jorin nodded, as if he had expected this response. "It is not something you find, Kaen. It is something you allow. Peace is not a possession. It is an understanding of what is already here." Kaen lowered the broom and looked out toward the distant mountains. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the valley. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The world seemed to slow down in the twilight. "Is it this moment?" Kaen asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is this peace?" Jorin smiled gently. "Yes, it is. The peace you seek is not found in the future, nor in the past. It is here, now, in the very breath you take. The challenge is to be present enough to recognize it." They stood in silence, watching the fading light. Kaen felt a stillness settle over him that he had never known before. It wasn't a peace that came from external circumstances. It was a deep, quiet knowing that peace existed within him, in this very moment. The next morning, Jorin gave Kaen a new task, an invitation to look deeper into his own actions. "Today, as you wash the dishes, do so with awareness. Feel the water, the soap, the motion of your hands. Do not think of anything else, only of the task at hand." Kaen was puzzled at first. He had washed dishes countless times before, but never had it been so intentional. The simplicity of the task seemed so insignificant. Yet Jorin's words lingered in his mind as he washed each plate. He focused on the warmth of the water, the smoothness of the ceramic, the rhythm of his own movements. The noise in his mind quieted as his focus shifted entirely to the present moment. By the end of the day, Kaen felt a subtle shift in his perception. It was as if the edges of the world had softened, and all that remained was the flow of life as it was. There was no struggle, no race to the next task or goal. For the first time in a long while, Kaen simply was. Jorin noticed the change. "How does it feel?" he asked. Kaen looked at him, a small smile forming on his lips. "It feels like I've finally stopped searching." Jorin's eyes sparkled with quiet approval. That is the path of patience, the path where you no longer chase after enlightenment, but simply allow it to be. Days turned into weeks, and Kaen continued to practice being present in every moment. He became more attuned to the quiet rhythms of the world around him, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the sound of the stream, the movement of the clouds across the sky. These simple things, once unnoticed, now filled him with a deep sense of peace. One evening after a long day of work, Kaen sat beside Jorin, both of them watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky. Kaen asked, "Master, how do I know when I am truly at peace?" Jorin gazed at the stars and then at Kaen. "You will know when you no longer need to ask," he said softly. "Peace is not something that can be described. It is the quiet acceptance of what is, right here, right now. It does not need to be understood. It simply needs to be lived." Kaen sat quietly, looking up at the stars. The answer felt clear to him now, not in his mind, but in the stillness of his heart. He had been searching for something outside of himself, but the peace he sought had always been there, within him. It was not something to attain, but something to embrace. In the days that followed, Kaen began to fully understand the teachings that Jorin had shared with him, though they had never been spoken directly. The simplicity of life, the gentle pace of each task, and the ever-present quiet were no longer foreign to him. He no longer sought peace in distant lands or distant futures, but in the very moment he was living. One morning as the first light of dawn touched the valley, Jorin took Kaen up a small hill behind the cabin. They stood at the top, looking down at the village in the distance, the smoke from the chimneys rising gently into the cool air. "Master," Kaen said, "I still don't fully understand. If peace is everywhere, why do people search for it so desperately?" Jorin looked out over the valley, his face soft but full of understanding. "People search because they believe peace is a thing to be found, something to be achieved. They look outward, thinking it is in the future, in things or in circumstances. But peace is not a place. It is a way of being. It is already inside them." Kaen nodded slowly, trying to absorb the depth of Jorin's words. He had spent so much of his life chasing something he could not define. Now, the more he practiced the art of presence, the more he realized that the search itself was the very thing that had kept him from peace. "The mind," Jorin continued, "is like the surface of the water. When the water is stirred, it reflects the world in a distorted way. But when the water is still, it reflects the world as it truly is." Kaen thought about this. He had spent his life trying to control the waves of his thoughts, thinking that somehow they were the cause of his restlessness. He had never realized that his mind was like the water Jorin described, constantly moving, constantly reflecting the world in ways that did not show the truth. "Master," Kaen asked, "how do I calm my mind? How do I still the water?" Jorin turned to him, his eyes filled with the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived through countless seasons of life. The mind cannot be calmed by force, Kaen. It can only be calmed by allowing it to be. Let the thoughts come and go as they will, without judgment, without attachment. When you stop struggling with them, they will fade, like ripples fading from the surface of a pond. They stood there in silence for a long time, the only sound being the soft whisper of the wind. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for Kaen to truly understand the truth of Jorin's words. In the days that followed, Kaen practiced this new way of being. He no longer fought with his thoughts or tried to chase after peace. Instead, he embraced whatever arose in his mind, letting the thoughts come and go without attachment. He began to see the world with clearer eyes, noticing the beauty in the smallest details, each leaf, each stone, each passing cloud. One evening, as Kaen sat by the stream, listening to the soft gurgling of the water, Jorin joined him. The evening sky was painted with shades of purple and gold, and the air was still and cool. "You've come far, Kaen," Jorin said, his voice calm and steady. "But remember, the path never ends. The journey of peace is not a destination. It is the way you walk each day." Kaen looked at the monk, his heart filled with a quiet gratitude. "I understand now, Master," he said. "It's not about reaching some final point. It's about being present with each step, with each moment." Jorin smiled, a smile that was both kind and knowing. "Exactly. The journey is the destination. There is no need to rush, no need to seek. You are already where you need to be." As the days turned into weeks and the seasons changed, Kaen continued his life with Jorin, now more deeply attuned to the rhythms of the world around him. He had learned to walk the silent path, the path of patience, presence, and acceptance. He no longer searched for peace outside himself, for he had discovered that peace was not something to be found. It was something to be realized within. One day, Kaen stood at the edge of the valley, looking out at the vast landscape that stretched before him. He felt no need to leave, no longing for anything beyond what he already had. In that moment, he realized that he had come to the place he had been searching for all along. It was not a place of stillness or quiet, but a place of understanding. That peace was not something you sought, but something you embodied in every breath, every step, and every thought. And with that realization, Kaen took his next step, fully present, fully at peace, walking the silent path that had always been waiting for him.